So speaking of wealth gaps, the U.S. You may know this gentleman in the picture. You may have an opinion on him. Anyway. Need any elastics or braiding material or anything? So back in 2017, when Trump was president, okay, he passed a big bill of tax cuts for Americans. Okay, and what he was saying, and his party, was that these tax breaks benefited everyone. Okay, so he was saying things like, by eliminating those tax breaks, we'll ensure the benefits are focused on the middle class, those middle, the working men and women, not the high income earners. But the Democrats, and one of the most prominent Democrats is Bernie Sanders, before Kamala Harris came along, said, no, these tax cuts are only benefiting the wealthiest people. It's just because they're getting such big tax cuts, it's making the average tax cut look large. But where's the average tax cut? Where's the weight of that coming from? It's coming from all those billionaires that are getting huge tax cuts, whereas the middle class is actually just getting very little. So they were arguing it both ways, but we'll sort of revisit that later. We're going to go back to our salaries example. Because I want to show you how we can actually calculate outliers. Before or up to this point, we only looked at a distribution that said there appears to be an outlier, or two, or three, or whatever. Well, there is a way to actually calculate whether something is an outlier. And from that, we use the interquartile range, which means we have to use the median. So when we do outliers, we want to look at the 5-number summary. Basically, there's 2 different summaries of data. Mean and standard deviation, because remember I said they go together. And then median, interquartile range, minimum, maximum, quartile 1, quartile 3. Those all go together. And actually, these 5 values, we call that the 5-number summary. So from those lists of salaries, at the very beginning of that lesson, the last lesson, we calculated the median to be 34,500. The minimum and the maximum are kind of obvious. Okay, those are obvious to find. Remember how we found Q1 and Q3. And those of you that had to leave early yesterday, this is just sort of a quick thing for you. To find the value of quartile 1 and quartile 3, well, the median, we said, was 34.5. The median split the distribution into 2 equal parts, 6 and 6. Okay? To find Q1, we take the lower 6 and we find the middle number there. So what's the middle number there? It'll be between 34 and 34. So that's how we get, so we get this by doing 34 plus 34 divided 2. That's how we got Q1. To get Q3, we take the upper 6. Find the 2 in the middle because it's an even number of data values, and average them. So Q3 will be the average of 39 and 43, which works out to 41. And then to actually find the IQR, we always take whatever the value of Q3 is minus Q1. So in the last class, we found the IQR was 41 minus 34 which equals 7. But remember, these are salaries in thousands of dollars, so it's 7,000. But then, of course, I showed you how to use your graphing calculator to find all these values. You weren't able to find the IQR. You actually had to calculate the IQR. But the IQR is pretty easy if you know Q3 and Q1. Okay. I'll actually calculate outliers. We need the values of Q3, Q1, and we need the IQR. Because the outliers are extremely or unusually high or low data values. How do you find them? Well, the outliers have to go past these two boundaries. For the upper boundary, you take the value of Q3 and you add 1.5 times the IQR. So to find the upper limit in this example, we would take the value of Q3, which is 41, plus 1.5 times the IQR, which is 7. That gives us 41 plus 10.5, which gives us 51.5. If there's a value that's higher than 51.5, it's an outlier. For the lower, we take the value of Q1, which was 34, and we subtract 1.5 times the IQR, subtract 1.5 times 7. So we're going to get 34 minus 10.5, which gives us 23.5. If there is a number that's lower than this, it is also an outlier. So now we go back to our original list of values, data values, or our distribution. Are there any values that go above 51.5 or below 23.5? Yes. Those two. So therefore, 67,000 and 185,000 are outliers. That's showing it mathematically. So you got to remember this when you're calculating outliers. Notice we don't use the mean and standard deviation to calculate outliers. We can only use the IQR and the 5 numbers. Yeah.
Like, is there room for, is it super objective and strict that, like, it has to be anything lower?
Yes. Yes. But like, I'll say yes, but.
Like, we're talking about interpretation earlier.
Right, because like statistics, yes, it's a science, but in many ways it's also an art. Okay, because it does have some subjectivity to it. Okay. Okay. One thing we can do with 5-number summaries that we saw up there, and what are the 5 numbers in a 5-number summary? Minimum, Q1, median, Q3, maximum. Okay. We can graph them. And the graph that we use is called the box plot. Sometimes you'll hear it called the box and whisker plot because it has a box and it has a couple of whiskers. Okay. How do we graph these? Well, it all depends on the 5-number summary. Whatever the value is, whether it's a dot or whether it's this vertical bar, okay? This here, whatever the lowest is, that's going to be the minimum. Always. Go to the furthest right, we've got a vertical bar, that value is going to be the maximum. And that makes sense because if you go, remember if we looked at, do I have the numbers here? Yeah. That was about 29,000. Okay. Wait a minute. Something's wrong here. Oh no. Don't. What is the scale? Okay, this scale, sorry. Yeah. I was looking at the numbers here and I got thrown off. Obviously, the numbers don't match up with the employees' salaries. Okay, so this is a different distribution of numbers. But we still measure it the same. Anyway, that's still the maximum and minimum. Going to the rectangle. The vertical bar inside the rectangle will be where the median is located. The left side of the rectangle will be Q1, and the right side of the rectangle will be Q3. Okay? Yes. The dots, if there's dots that are past the whiskers, what do you think those are? Outliers. So yes, obviously this doesn't match up with the salaries because the outliers were high. In this example, the outliers are low. Okay. So that's how you, again, you don't really have to worry too much about constructing a box plot, but more about interpreting it and comparing box plots, which what we're going to finish this lesson with, and even adopt with. You can use box plots to determine skew or whether they're roughly symmetrical. Like this should be obvious to you, hopefully, that it is skewed to the right. And this one below it is skewed. Yep. Yeah, if there's no outliers, it's going to look like that. And the line. Yes, yes. This, yeah. If these aren't here, that would be the minimum. And remember, this has nothing to do with mean and standard deviation. If you want to talk about box plots, you can talk about whether they're skewed to the left or right or roughly symmetric. But then when you talk about their measure of center, what measure do you talk about? Median. If you talk about their variability, what measure do you talk about? What measure of variability goes with median? IQR, interquartile range. Standard deviation and range go with mean. Standard deviation, range, mean, nothing to do with this, although I suppose you could find the range. Okay. But if it's median, its variability has to be interquartile range. Okay. So if I look at this distribution, if I want to describe it, remember I said you got to use 4 components: shape, center, variability, and outliers. I would say this distribution is skewed to the right. Its center is whatever this value is, because that's the median. Its variability is whatever this minus this is, because that's the IQR. And there are 2 outliers in the distribution, because the box plot makes it clear what they are. That's how I describe a box plot distribution. And actually, we do it on the next page. So I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. Remember, the 5-number summary breaks a distribution of data into quarters. The median, 50% below, 50% above. Okay? Q1 is halfway between the minimum and the median, so that means 25% would be below Q1 or between the minimum and quartile 1, 25% would be between quartile 1 and the median, etc. So let's answer these questions. What percent of the data is below Q1? 25%. Below Q3, below 75%. Above Q1. Above the median. And the last one, within the IQR. That's 50. Isn't each one of these 25? So between these two is 25 and 25, which is 50. Be familiar with that. The percentages above and below or between 5-number summary values. Okay. So here's a different example of a box plot that actually has some numbers, and this is a box plot of the salaries. This is. And see, we calculated one of the outliers was 67,000, another one was the 185, I think it was, yeah. Okay. So how would we describe this? Well, the shape is, how would you describe this shape? It'd be skewed round because of those outliers. If those outliers weren't there, then we're almost close to roughly symmetrical, although it would probably still be a little skewed right where the median is. Okay. The measure of center, well, we're automatically going to talk about the median for the box plot. The median salary, if you want to write in context, is whatever we had the median was, and we figured it out. It was 34,500. And the interquartile range, or IQR, we already calculated that, was $7,000. And there are 2 outlier salaries. So that's enough. That's a couple of sentences on describing the distribution. And notice we've dealt with shape, center, variability, and outliers. What about comparing box plots? And this is the last thing I want to talk about. Here are two, and this revisits tax cuts. So here's two tax cut plans. Here we have tax cut A. So what would the median, I'm just going to ask you, what would the median tax cut be in A? Yeah, maybe a little less, right? A little less than 1,500. So maybe 1,400 or something like that. That's in. What's the median in B? Yeah, like 200 bucks. Okay. Yet the average tax cut for both plans was 1,260. So you can see how different measures can reveal different things. So when we go back to the Trump tax cuts, he talks about, like, oh yeah, the average tax cut was $1,260. Yeah, the average or mean was, but that's because, right, a whole bunch of billionaires hold the average up. But if we want to look at the median was only 200 bucks. That means 50% of Americans got a tax cut below 200 bucks. 50%. This represents 50% of the states right here. This little, between this bar and this one. This represents the other 50%. Okay. A chunk of people here, which we would sort of call middle class, middle upper class, and then, yeah, the really rich ones. Okay. So again, when we compare distributions, and I talked about this before, things that you want to use. Make sure I have this right. Oh, this should already been fine. Use the four components. Okay. Use comparative language when you can. And by comparative, I mean greater than, less than, same as, when you can. You can't really use comparative language when you compare shape. Okay? So if I want to compare the two distributions above, the two box plots, you can use coin form if you like. I'm okay with that. So the shape of A is, what would you say? To the left? Maybe a little to the left? Roughly symmetrical? Could be that too. Okay. So we could say roughly symmetrical, or slight left skew. You don't want to say skewed left with this one, because it's not very strongly skewed left. And then we would just say, well, the shape of B is, this one's obvious. Yeah, skewed right, strongly skewed right. Where is this line? So that's the shape. The median of A is, and we said it was, yeah, about 14, 1400. 1400, which is greater than the median of B at about $200. The IQR of A is about, what would we say if we look at that? Go from the left side of the rectangle or the box to so the left side looks about 500, right side looks about 2000. So therefore the IQR is about 1500, which will definitely be greater than the IQR. Which is greater than the IQRB. At about the less 500, but we could say 500 because the left side of that box in B is pretty close to 0. So I'd say about $500. So you can definitely use comparative language when you compare the center and the variability. And finally, plan A or A have no outliers. Whereas plan B has many outliers. You add high outliers if you wanted to, but this will be fine. But just remember, as soon as you see the phrases describe a distribution or compare to distributions, you've got to use the 4 components. That's what I'm looking for. That's what they'll be looking for on the APs. Okay. And we've kind of talked about the tax cuts already, so I'm not going to worry about the discussion.